They say there are nights you never forget because they split life in two. The night St. Michael the Archangel appeared with his fiery sword to deliver an urgent warning was one of those nights that tear the veil of the everyday and turn everything into something sacred and trembling. Imagine for a second the heavy silence of a sleeping village, the icy wind stirring the leaves, and an old man kneeling beside an image of the Virgin Mary, his heart beating so hard it seemed to want to burst out of his chest. There were no cameras, no lights, no witnesses, just a lit candle, a sincere prayer, and a whisper that broke the darkness. The old man, named Herminio, had been asking for a sign for years. He had heard rumors of wars, of brothers at odds, of families destroyed by violence and indifference. Every night he asked the Virgin for an answer, a word to calm his heart. But that night was different. When Herminio closed his eyes, he felt a strange warmth on the back of his neck, as if someone had placed a firm hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes, and there it was. It was no ordinary vision. It was no dream. St. Michael the Archangel, with his wings outstretched and his sword blazing like a flash of lightning, looked at the old man with a mixture of strength and tenderness. St. Michael didn't give a long speech. He didn't fill the room with lightning or thunder. He simply whispered, "Wake up those who still sleep, for time is shortening and the final battle is already knocking at the door." Herminio didn't immediately understand. He wanted to ask, but his voice was lost in the trembling of his throat. The Archangel placed the sword on the floor, and the wood lit up as if it were burning without being consumed. A phrase was engraved there that Herminio never erased. "Only ardent prayer protects when the night has completely closed in." From that night on, Herminio began going from house to house, door to door, carrying that message. Many thought he was crazy. Others closed the door before listening to him. But a few, only a few, stopped their haste to sit beside him and open their ears and hearts. He spoke to them of the final warning, of what was to come, of how the enemy of souls dresses in light to confuse, divide, and devour. He told them it wasn't about being afraid, but about awakening, about lighting living candles in each person's heart. Because what St. Michael came to deliver is not only a warning of destruction, but an opportunity for protection for those willing to fight with invisible weapons: faith, prayer, fasting, unity. And so a small circle of watchful hearts began to form. Simple people, peasants, mothers, young people who didn't know how to pray, but had learned to kneel. Every night they gathered under a dead tree that suddenly began to blossom mysteriously. They said it was a sign that faith, when it is authentic, revives what seems dead. Under that tree they lit candles, prayed the rosary, and shared silences so profound that the wind seemed to stop and listen. Herminio repeated over and over again, "This isn't for sleeping peacefully, it's for keeping us awake. Because night will come and bring confusion, and only those who pray with fire will have light to guide them." Some, upon hearing these words, felt a chill run down their spines. Others were filled with hope, because deep down everyone sensed that something big was brewing, something no newscast was reporting, but something the heavens were silently shouting about. This story reached neighboring villages. And without social media, without microphones, without live broadcasts, the flame began to leap from heart to heart. Today, as you listen to this, that warning resonates again. It's not about fearing the darkness, but about lighting the flame that breaks the gloom. St. Michael didn't come to instill fear. He came to deliver a shield. But that shield isn't inherited, bought, or begged for. It's forged every dawn, in the silence of a room, in the murmur of a rosary, in the whisper of an Our Father when no one is looking. Now that you hear these words, I want to ask you, what would you do if St. Michael laid his sword at your feet tonight? Would you sleep peacefully, knowing it wasn't with you? Or would you take up the invisible sword of prayer and keep watch while others sleep? The battle isn't visible, but the wounds are. Look around, divided families, cold hearts, extinguished faith. And yet, There is still time, there is still fire, there is still a voice calling from on high. Wake up those who still sleep. Herminio did it. You and I, what will we do? Don't answer now. Keep this question burning inside, because what comes next will reveal the second part of this warning, the sign that St. Michael gave Herminio so that you would know how to distinguish truth from deception when the night grows darker. When Herminio began to share St. Michael's warning, many asked the same question. How will we know this is real? How can we distinguish truth from deception when confusion arrives? Herminio, humble as he was, didn't have all the answers, but he kept a secret that the Archangel left him that night by the fire of his sword, a sign as clear as it was invisible that would mark those who are awake and reveal those who prefer to remain asleep. They say that Herminio sat every evening under the tree that had miraculously turned green. There he gathered the curious, the fearful, and those hungry for hope. And when the sun set, he would light a candle and say, "Look at this flame. No matter how strong the wind blows, if the hand that holds it is steady, the light remains." Such is the sign, simple, fragile in the eyes of the world, but unshakable when held in faith. The sign wasn't a meteor in the sky or a rain of fire. It wasn't a spectacular vision to feed the curious. It was and remains something so simple that many ignore it. Silent fidelity. St. Michael warned, "A time will come when many will use my name, speak of the Virgin, repeat prayers by heart, but their hearts will be far away." The sign will be the living flame within, the prayer that doesn't go out when no one is looking, the fidelity that doesn't boast, the purity that doesn't cry out, but burns like an ember. Herminio recounted that a few days after the apparition, he began to notice that some who came to listen to him only wanted new words to show off their knowledge. They asked about dates, catastrophes, details to feed the fears of others. But when Herminio asked them to pray together, close their eyes, and let the silence speak, many would get up and leave. Because the sign is not found outside, but in the stillness of one who is willing to be transformed. A woman, Clara, was known for making fun of Herminio. She called him a village fool, an old man who made up stories to feel important. One night, out of pure curiosity, she approached the prayer circle. She sat far away, arms crossed, ready to laugh. But when Herminio lit the candle and began to pray, Clara felt something strange. A kind of gentle warmth, as if the candle's fire were multiplying inside her chest. She tried to resist, but tears escaped without permission. That night, Clara understood that the sign isn't shown to the eyes, but burns inside like a firm whisper. "I am here. Don't ignore me anymore." From then on, Clara exchanged her mockery for silence and her silence for prayer. She became a silent guardian, one of those souls who hold the candle alive while others play with the darkness. Because St. Michael was clear, the battle will not be won by noisy crowds, but by hidden hearts praying in secret. The old man explained that the sign appears when everything around you invites you to extinguish your faith, when mockery, doubt, and distraction knock at the door, when everything screams, "It's useless, there's no point in praying, no one listens," and yet you remain on your knees, candle lit, whispering Hail Marys in the early morning. That silent fidelity is the sign, nothing more, nothing less. But St. Michael didn't leave Herminio alone with words. He also revealed something few know, a whisper to detect falsehood. He told him, "There will be those who speak of me and the Virgin, but their lips and hearts will not be united. Their fruits will be confusion, division, and pride disguised as jealousy. Examine the fruits, not the words. The true sign unites, heals, and awakens a hunger for purity and love." As the days passed, Herminio saw how some who claimed to follow the warning ended up fighting each other, accusing each other of not praying enough, judging each other as if they were judges from heaven. And he understood that the sign, the only one that counts, is one that produces humility, compassion, and a burning love for the truth, not pride disguised as holiness. That's why whenever someone asked him for spectacular proof, Herminio would respond with the same thing. Don't look for fireworks. Look for the flame that never goes out when you close your eyes. Look for fidelity in the small things. There is the sign. Some became frustrated, others left. But those who stayed discovered that something changed inside. A new strength to get up early, to pray when no one asks it, to keep quiet when the tongue wants to hurt, to forgive when everything invites resentment. Today, as you listen to this, you may feel a gentle burning within you like a small spark. That's the sign. Don't ignore it. Saint Michael didn't come to scare you. He came to awaken you. What you do with that spark will determine whether, when the night grows darkest, you'll have light to see the path. And as Herminio continued lighting candles in the gloom, the warning flowed like a silent river. What began as a whisper transformed into a murmur that crossed villages, mountains, and willing hearts. And soon, very soon, the warning would bring with it an even deeper secret, the invisible shield that protects those who keep the sign burning. As Herminio walked dusty paths repeating the sign of St. Michael, something secretly began to happen among the few who truly listened with an open heart. Some realized that it wasn't enough to light an external candle if the internal flame didn't burn brighter. Others understood that keeping that tiny spark alive in the darkest night required more than pretty words. It required an invisible shield, a protection that can't be seen, but is felt like an armor of fire around the soul. One cold night, Herminio sat with those who remained awake under the blossoming tree. The wind stirred the leaves. The moon seemed to watch from above, silent. It was then that he spoke of what St. Michael had revealed to him in whispers. It is not enough to know. It is not enough to believe. You must be sealed. That word resounded like a strange echo. Sealed? How? What does it mean to be sealed when there is no visible mark, no tattoo, no outward symbol? Herminio explained that St. Michael had shown him in a vision an army of shadows advancing slowly over fields and cities, an army that doesn't carry iron swords, but lies, distractions, and seeds of confusion. They advance silently, slipping through cracks, cloaking themselves in light to deceive. But he also saw something else. A fire burned in some hearts that no shadow could touch, an invisible seal that kept the invasion of darkness at bay. That seal was nothing other than living prayer, total surrender, the renunciation of a double life. It was, in the words of the Archangel, the invisible shield that is only forged in intimacy with heaven. It wasn't enough to simply pay lip service to prayer. Purity, humility, and ardent love had to be safeguarded. That inner fire becomes a wall of flame when night falls. Many of Herminio's listeners began to ask questions. Some wanted quick formulas. What exact prayer? What words to repeat? What blessed object to hang around the neck? Herminio, in a calm voice, always responded the same way. You don't hang a shield, you live it. You don't buy it, you cultivate it. And he told the story of Don Evaristo, a simple man, the father of 4 children, who worked as a day laborer from sunrise to moonset. He had no education. He couldn't read much more than his name and a few verses from the gospel. But every night before going to sleep, he knelt beside his bed and prayed with such pure faith that one could feel the presence of something sacred in that room, with its cracked walls. When violence touched his village and many fled or surrendered to fear, Don Evaristo remained steadfast. His house was never looted. His children never left his side. Those who knew him said something invisible protected his door, and Herminio would say, it wasn't magic, it was the invisible shield forged by his simple and constant prayer. Thus, those listening under the tree understood that the coat of arms of St. Michael is not for boasting or bragging about being special. It is a gift activated by humility. It is nourished by silence, strengthened by every hidden act of fidelity. No matter how strong the storm, those who cultivate that fire within walk surrounded by a protection that darkness cannot pierce. But the Archangel also warned of something few want to hear. He who neglects his flame weakens his shield. He who becomes intoxicated by distraction exposes himself without realizing it. And when the dark wind blows, he who does not watch will fall. Herminio, with a trembling voice, told them that the greatest battle would not be between nations, but within each heart. A silent struggle between the light that wants to stay lit and the shadow that whispers in the ear, "Sleep, distract your mind, abandon prayer, tomorrow you will have time." And the softer the whisper, the more dangerous it becomes, because it doesn't raise alarm. It goes out slowly, almost without one noticing. That night, as the candles flickered under the tree, Herminio invited everyone to seal themselves again, not with oil or pompous rituals, but with the courageous decision to return to their first love, to pray as if their lives depended on it, because they do, to renounce double talk, to close doors that darkness exploits, and when one falls, because everyone falls, to get up quickly, cleanse the flame, and move forward. So, little by little, some began to notice changes. Gossip became less important, criticism lost its flavor, the desire to speak ill of others became uncomfortable, and in its place, a new desire was born, to guard the brother's flame, to protect the other's faith, to seal the family with prayers that become walls of light. This invisible shield makes no noise, it doesn't shine for show. But when night comes, and Herminio swore that a night darker than any we've seen would come, that fire will be the only thing standing between the shadow and your house, and those who are forged now in the stillness will keep hope burning when many run aimlessly. And while Herminio was telling this, a young woman interrupted him. What else did St. Michael say? What should we expect after we are sealed? Herminio looked at her and, with his voice almost fading, replied, "He said that whoever is sealed must awaken others, because no one is saved alone, and the time of silence will soon become a time of fire." It was then that those listening knew the warning wasn't just for them, that each burning heart must become a torch for others, and that soon, very soon, the Archangel would reveal the next step, the invisible sword each one must take up. When Herminio spoke of the invisible shield, many understood that protecting oneself wasn't hiding. St. Michael the Archangel didn't come to form armies of fearful souls, but rather silent warriors, ordinary people who wield a sword that cuts neither flesh nor sheds blood, but that breaks chains, shatters lies, and awakens sleeping hearts. Under the greening tree, people asked, "What is that sword? Where did we get it? How do you wield something you can't see?" Herminio took a deep breath before answering, because he knew that many expected a magic formula, a secret relic, a blessed object to hang around the neck as if protection came from outside. But the invisible sword isn't forged outside. It forms within, blow by blow, like a fire that grows every time one prays from deep within. St. Michael explained it to him this way that night. Many carry words of faith on their lips, but their hands are empty. The sword is the living word spoken with faith, the prayer kindled with real fire. It is not praying by heart, it is wielding each word like a blade that cuts through lies. Herminio recounted that after the apparition, for entire nights he felt a burning in his chest that kept him awake. An insistent voice told him, "Wake up those who sleep, but also give them the sword. If you only light the flame and don't give them the sword, the shadow will come and suffocate them." Then he understood. To light is to wake up, but the sword is to act. To pray, yes, but also to live according to what you pray. There was a young man, Gabriel, who listened to everything, always sitting at the edge of the group. He had restless eyes and hands hardened from working in the fields. One day he dared to approach Herminio and asked, "How can I have that sword? I don't know how to pray beautifully like others." Herminio smiled and replied, "You don't need pretty words, you need the truth. Every time you choose to remain silent instead of hurting, every time you forgive when it hurts, every time you defend the innocent, you wield the invisible sword. Gabriel understood that prayer and action are two edges of the same sword. That night, while his family slept, he went out into the fields, knelt under the moon, and began to pray the rosary with the few Hail Marys he could remember. He did so slowly, pronouncing each word as if he were ploughing furrows in the earth. And there, in that cold field, he felt for the first time that something was breaking, a chain of resentment that had bound him for years. With each Our Father, the sword cut the bond. And Gabriel returned home with something different in his eyes, a light that not even fatigue could extinguish. Herminio repeated to everyone, "The invisible sword is not for attacking others, but for cutting what binds us within. Whoever wields it becomes a warrior, not of the crowd, but of the secret. Warriors who first fight against their own pride, their lies, their double standards. Warriors who don't seek applause because their battlefield is invisible to many." But St. Michael made it clear that this sword also has an edge for others. The word of truth, spoken when it is easier to remain silent, the counsel that heals, the correction that saves, the voice that breaks the silence when injustice echoes, not to humiliate but to awaken. "There will be times," said the Archangel, "when your silence will be a sword, and other times your voice will be a spear. Ask for discernment to know when to be silent and when to speak." As Herminio's small community grew, something began to change in the village. People who had once shouted at each other now heard each other. Bickering neighbors asked for forgiveness. Hardened men began praying the rosary together. Women who carried resentment let go of old wounds, all because they understood that their prayer was more than words. It was a living sword that gave them back their freedom. But Herminio also warned, wielding the invisible sword will bring struggle. Whoever decides to cut chains will feel resistance. The shadow will disguise itself as excuses, distraction, and tiredness. It will tell you, pray tomorrow, talk later, forgive when it's easier. And as you procrastinate, the chain strengthens. So cut it today. Many looked at him with fear. And Herminio understood that fear because he had felt it too. That's why he told them, "Do not be afraid. St. Michael does not leave us alone. Every time you take up the sword of faith, a legion of angels surrounds your house, but you must lift it up. No one will fight your battle if you don't take the first step." Some doubted these stories. Others scoffed. How can a rosary be a sword? How can praying change the world? But those who dared to try it saw with their own eyes that something happened. Arguments were resolved, misunderstandings were cleared up, invisible chains fell away one by one. It wasn't magic. It was the power of heaven acting through brave hearts. Thus, little by little, the burning flame, the invisible shield, and the sword of prayer formed a silent army. Mothers, fathers, young people and old people, all different but with the same weapon. A community that began to glow in the night, like embers igniting each other. And when Herminio gathered his people under the tree, he always reminded them, a sword is not kept, it is shared. Because if only you cut your chains and forget your brother, your sword rusts. Awaken another, teach him to pray, share the flame. The Archangel said, a single fire can light 1,000 torches without going out. Thus, St. Michael's warning became a mission, not for a select few, but for every heart willing to hold the candle, raise the shield, and wield the sword. And although the battle remained silent, Herminio knew, and he whispered, that a sign would soon come that would ignite many at once, the visible signal that would confirm everything that until now seemed secret. As Herminio's small community grew in secret, the night seemed more peaceful. The candles remained lit beneath the blossoming tree, a silent sign of hope. Hearts awoke one by one, like embers igniting other embers. But everyone knew, because Herminio repeated it tirelessly, that there would come a day when the whisper would become thunder, and the signal that until then had burned hidden within their chests would shatter the earth, cry out to the sky, and shake those who preferred to sleep. It was Clara, the woman who had once mocked Herminio, who first sensed that something was about to change. One morning she woke up and felt a strange chill in the house, as if a veil had covered the walls. She prayed a Hail Mary with a broken voice, and when she opened the window, she saw an intense light beyond the greening tree. It wasn't an ordinary flash of lightning. It was a glow that illuminated the night, as if a second sun had descended to earth. She ran to wake Herminio. She ran to knock on the doors of those who were still sleeping. "Come, look, wake up!" The entire village gathered under the tree. Children, the elderly, women who had never prayed together, unbelieving men. Everyone stared at the glow, unsure if it was a sign of hope or a warning of what was to come. Herminio stepped forward in the crowd. His silhouette seemed small in the light. He raised his hand as if to touch it and whispered, "The sign." Saint Michael spoke of this. Saint Michael had told him, when the faith of a few sustains the flame, when prayer cuts chains and the sword is shared, heaven will confirm with a visible sign that will leave no room for doubt. The light spoke no words, but it burned in the eyes of everyone. Some fell to their knees, others wept, others trembled, unable to grasp the magnitude of what they were seeing. Herminio explained with a trembling voice that the light wasn't a punishment, but a reminder. The final warning was approaching its crucial moment. Those who had been hesitant until now would have one last chance to decide. There would be no excuses. The visible signal would ignite consciences and reveal what many were hiding behind pious masks. That night, no one slept in the village. Beside the blossoming tree, hearts opened, confessions flowed, grudges were forgiven. Clara hugged a neighbor she hadn't spoken to in years. Gabriel took the hand of his father, from whom he had been estranged for so long. The fire of the visible sign burned pride, softened hearts of stone, uncovered tears held back for too long. But Herminio insisted, "Don't trust only what you see. The light will pass, the brightness will fade. What matters is what remains lit within. The visible sign awakens, but fidelity sustains." Some didn't understand. They wanted the light to remain forever, for the entire village to live enveloped in that radiance. But St. Michael had been clear. This light is a warning, not an eternal lamp. When it goes out, each person will decide whether to continue to sustain their own flame. In the following days, the rumor of the sign spread like wildfire. Neighboring villages began to arrive to see the tree, to ask what had happened. Many didn't see the light, but they did see different faces, glowing eyes, words full of faith, reconciled families. And they understood that the true miracle wasn't the light on the tree, but the light within hearts that had previously been dull. Curious onlookers, local journalists, and people with cameras eager to film soon arrived. Some wanted sensational headlines, others were just looking for something new to talk about. Herminio, without objection, repeated the same thing to everyone. "Don't just look at the tree, look at your own flame. What matters isn't out here, but in there." Despite the mockery of some visitors, something began to happen in other villages. Prayer groups formed without any formal organization. Farmers who barely knew how to pray began to gather at dusk. Candles were lit in windows, rosaries improvised with seeds and string. The invisible chains began to silently break, because the visible sign lit a fire that no one could hide. But Herminio wasn't fooled. He knew that where the light shines, the shadow moves. Saint Michael had warned him, when the sign awakens many, the enemy will move to confuse more. And so it happened. With the light also came false prophets, men who claimed to have new messages, spectacular visions, supposed secrets they charged to reveal. They promised protection in exchange for blind obedience, presenting themselves as chosen ones. Some, thirsty for visible miracles, followed them. Others, attentive to Herminio's voice, remembered his words. "Examine the fruits. True fire unites and purifies. False fire divides and consumes." It was then that Herminio gathered his small group together again and told them the next part of the warning. Saint Michael didn't come to leave us just a sign. He gave us a key to stand firm when deception mingles with truth. That key was simpler and more powerful than many imagined. It wasn't a mystery kept for a select few, but a key that every heart could hold if it was willing to truly open itself. And under the shade of the blossoming tree, as the crowd dispersed to tell what they had seen, Herminio whispered into the ears of Clara, Gabriel, and a few others, "Prepare yourselves. What comes now is the revelation of that key. Because soon, when the confusion worsens, only those who hold this key will be able to distinguish the voice of truth from the whispers that seek to lead astray." When the light went out, many felt a strange emptiness, as if the night had suddenly swallowed up what seemed impossible to hide. But Herminio knew, and he repeated it again and again, that the true battle is not fought with lights in the sky or with spectacular miracles, but in the silence where no one applauds. Therefore, when the crowd dispersed, he gathered those closest to him under the greening tree, and almost whispering, began to reveal the hidden key that St. Michael the Archangel had entrusted to him to sustain them when the confusion struck hardest. St. Michael had told him, "A time will come when lies will disguise themselves so perfectly as truth that many good people will fall for lack of deep roots. The key is this: keep your heart united to the source, not to external signs." Herminio explained that to understand this secret, we must return to the simplest things, to what many had forgotten, the intimate relationship with God, that union so living that it does not depend on apparitions or spectacular messages or the excitement of crowds, a bond so profound that it is nourished by silent prayer, by the word ruminated slowly, by the Eucharist received as true fire. There is no prophet greater than Christ. There is no voice purer than that of the gospel. There is no sign stronger than a clear conscience, Herminio repeated, looking at Clara, Gabriel, and all those who remained silent around them. He reminded them how, so often, people run after supposed seers, new words, promises of magical protection, and without realizing it, their faith becomes a collector of emotions, but its root dries up. St. Michael was clear. In the hour of greatest darkness, many will follow any voice that promises safety, but only the steadfast hearts, those trained in silence, will recognize my voice and that of the Mother. Clara asked through tears, "And how does one train for that? How do you know it's not just imagination, that it's not a deception?" Herminio took a deep breath, because he knew that this was the question that held the salvation of many. "You train like a soldier, day by day, with discipline, with fidelity in the small things. Do you want to recognize the voice of heaven? First learn to silence the noise of the world." He explained that the key is not to seek great revelations, but to return to the beginning, confessing sins without fear, receiving communion only when your heart is clean, reading the word slowly, repeating simple prayers until your mind and heart become one. The Rosary, the Eucharist, the leisurely reading of the Gospel, what so many consider repetitive or boring is, in reality, the sword that sharpens the inner ear. Gabriel understood that the hidden key was almost invisible because it didn't promise spectacle. It didn't sell easy promises. It didn't attract curious crowds. It was simple, almost poor in the eyes of the world, but therein lay its power. Whoever takes it seriously becomes unshakable. The wind of confusion may come, the murmur of false voices, the glitter of false miracles, but a steadfast heart recognizes the fragrance of the Holy Spirit and doesn't let itself be swept away. Herminio insisted, "Let us not despise visible signs, but let us not place faith in them. If the sign disappears, the steadfast heart remains. If the crowd disperses, the steadfast heart prays. If others fall into the trap of lies disguised as light, the steadfast heart rises because it knows where it draws." That night, under the shade of the tree, Clara remembered how years before her faith depended on strong emotions. She would go from one place to another, seeking prayer groups, waiting for visions, praying to feel something that would give her certainty. But when she felt nothing, she collapsed. Now she understood that true faith doesn't depend on feeling, but on remaining, and that this permanence is strengthened in the silent routine of a humble soul who prays even when she feels nothing special. Herminio also spoke about humility as part of the key. He said, the enemy's greatest trap is to inflate spiritual pride. He makes you believe you're special because you receive messages, because you dream things, because others listen to you. The true messenger doesn't boast, doesn't charge, doesn't seek followers. He makes himself small so that heaven may grow. As the night wore on, some began to understand that the hidden key wasn't a secret for just a few enlightened ones. It was an open gift, but one so humble that most overlook it. And so, in that silent humility, faith becomes like a deep root that cannot be broken by the wind. Herminio repeated the words of Saint Michael, when the noise becomes deafening, seek silence. When confusion clouds your vision, return to the gospel. When you feel fear, kneel. When others run after miracles, hold fast to what you already know, the rosary, the Eucharist, the Word. Don't seek to shine, seek to endure. Clara and Gabriel looked at each other, and they knew at that moment that what they were receiving was not simple advice, but the compass that would save many when the hurricane of deception arose. Herminio asked them one last thing before closing the meeting that night. Don't keep this key to yourself. Awaken others, instruct others. Because a time will come when those who do not have this firm root will be lost, even if they have thousands of signs before their eyes. And as the candles went out one by one, Clara felt something burning inside her. It wasn't fear, it was certainty. The certainty that a new stage of the warning would soon open, when the fidelity of the steadfast heart would be tested like never before, and that St. Michael hadn't finished speaking. There was still one more piece of the message left, a revelation that would test even the strongest. Herminio's whisper under the shade of the greening tree left Clara and Gabriel with a question that burned inside. How strong is a steadfast heart when the storm ceases to be a rumor and becomes reality? Because St. Michael hadn't promised an easy path or protection that would avoid all pain. On the contrary, true fidelity shines precisely when it is tested in the darkness. Herminio told them that, in his last vision, St. Michael had shown him an open field, illuminated only by the moon. In the middle of the field, small lights flickered, each representing an awakened heart. Peasants, mothers, the elderly, and young people. Tiny flames that, seen from the sky, looked like fireflies floating in an ocean of shadows. But suddenly, a gust of icy wind swept across the field, and many of those lights went out. Only a few remained lit. And St. Michael, steadfast and radiant, said to him, "Do not fear the darkness, fear the warmth." That phrase echoed in Herminio's mind. Lukewarmness, that silent illness that extinguishes what is burning without violence, without shouting, without alarm. Lukewarmness comes disguised as justification, comfort, and pious excuses. It's praying without love, going to Mass out of habit, repeating words while the mind wanders far away. St. Michael made it clear that the final test would come like a fire that would separate the burning from the lukewarm. Clara listened with a racing heart. She herself remembered how many times she had believed herself faithful just because he spoke kind words. How many times she had lit candles without kindling her own will. "How do I overcome this lukewarmness?" she asked with a trembling voice. Herminio looked at her with the serenity of someone who carries the answer, not because he invented it, but because he lived it. The fire is rekindled with daily determination, today, now, in the small things. Whoever is faithful in the smallest things will be standing when the great things come. Gabriel, for his part, understood that the test would not be solely individual. St. Michael had also shown entire communities that would be shaken, prayer groups that would be divided by pride, families that would be torn apart by a lack of forgiveness, pastors who would falter for fear of losing prestige or comfort. Because the trial of fire not only purifies those who pray alone, it purifies everyone and shows who is willing to endure. Herminio shared the story of Marta and Antonio, a married couple who, after hearing the warning, had decided to transform their home into a small beacon. Every night, they prayed the rosary as a family. They opened the door to neighbors who wanted to learn to pray. Without realizing it, their house became a refuge for many. But when the visible sign illuminated the village, so did the mockery, criticism, and gossip. Some accused them of being fanatics. Others accused them of inventing miracles to make money. It was then that their fidelity was tested. Marta wept silently many nights, tempted to close the door and return to a life without discomfort. But Antonio kept telling her, "We can't blow out the candle now. If we fall, who will sustain the flame here?" That couple carried on. They stood firm when everything inside screamed that it was easier to give up. And Herminio always used his testimony to teach that the final test won't be a visible spectacle of destruction, but a subtle war within each heart, to resist or give in, to forgive or harden, to love or withdraw, to remain when everything invites one to flee. St. Michael had been clear. The fire of trial does not destroy those who are sealed. It only purifies, separating the dross from the gold. Faithful hearts will emerge stronger, more humble, more invisible to the vanity of the world, but more luminous in my eyes. Herminio encouraged everyone not to wait passively. He said, "The best time to prepare is today. Don't wait for the dark night to learn to pray. Don't wait for criticism to learn to love those who hurt you. The trial will come like a thief who doesn't give warning. Only a lit lamp finds the door when the darkness is total." Gabriel, who now led small prayer groups in the fields, saw with his own eyes the difference between those who repeated prayers out of habit and those who had truly let the flame burn within. The former abandoned everything at the first mockery, the first attack, the first discomfort. The latter, on the other hand, supported others, lifted up the fallen, and lit more torches with their own. Clara, for her part, began writing letters to other villages, inviting small groups to support one another. "If warmth is contagious, let fidelity be too," she wrote in each letter. And little by little, under the shade of the greening tree, an invisible network began to form. Scattered hearts, burning, connected by the same determination not to be defeated by comfort. Herminio knew there was still more to reveal, that St. Michael had prepared one last piece of the message, something that would give meaning to the entire preparation, the announcement of a spiritual refuge that is not a physical place, but a space that every heart can inhabit, an inner sanctuary that no storm, no matter how violent, can destroy. As the small village transformed into a burning beacon, Herminio felt in his heart that there was still something more to be revealed. He knew that neither the visible sign, nor the invisible sword, nor even proven fidelity would be enough if souls did not learn to inhabit the place where nothing and no one could touch them, the spiritual refuge. St. Michael had revealed this secret to him in a vision that came on the quietest night, when the village slept and Herminio stood watch alone under the blossoming tree. He then saw a dark storm covering fields and cities, lifting roofs, knocking down walls, shaking entire families. He saw multitudes running here and there, seeking shelter, finding nowhere to hide. And in the midst of that chaos, a small circle of light appeared, men and women kneeling, eyes closed, hands clasped. The storm raged around them, but could not touch them. St. Michael, standing behind them, murmured, "This is my refuge, not made of bricks, but of surrendered hearts." Herminio understood that many thought of refugees as physical places, secret caves, remote houses, blessed mountains. And yes, sometimes it is necessary to protect the body, but the Archangel insisted, true refuge is not a place, it is a condition of the soul. It is a clean, sealed, burning heart. Under the shade of the tree, Herminio explained to Clara, Gabriel, and all those who gathered there at night, each of us carries a sanctuary within us, a small flame that, when nourished with sincere prayer and a righteous life, becomes a wall of light. There, in that sanctuary, no wind of fear, no rumor of war, no deception can destroy what God protects. Clara remembered her fearful nights, when she believed her safety depended on padlocked doors, reinforced windows, and moving far away from rumors of violence. But now she understood that not even the thickest door protects as much as a sealed heart, because when the spirit becomes a living dwelling place, peace flourishes in the midst of any storm. Gabriel, meanwhile, traveled through neighboring villages sharing this part of the message. He invited entire families to gather in prayer, not only as a social ritual, but as a shield that protects the home. A family that prays together builds invisible walls that the enemy cannot tear down, he repeated. And wherever he went, he left behind small groups that lit candles on the darkest nights. But Herminio knew that, although many listened with emotion, few understood the depth of this refuge. It's not enough to simply light candles or repeat prayers. St. Michael was clear. Refuge is maintained with purity of intention, with sincere forgiveness, with living faith that does not compromise with lukewarmness. Those who turn their interior into a sanctuary do not fear the storm, because their safety depends not on walls, but on the presence that dwells within. As news of the spiritual refuge spread, some began to mock him. They said it was a tale for the gullible, an illusion for those who could not change the harshness of the world. But Herminio tirelessly repeated, "There is no wall stronger than a heart abandoned to God. There is no storm greater than his mercy." And when anyone doubted, he told the story of Don Bartolo, an old man who lived alone in a wooden shack, fragile and cracked by time. During the worst storm in the region, solid houses collapsed. Don Bartolo's shack remained standing. When asked why he didn't flee, he simply said, "My house stands because every night I give it to God from within." And he beat his chest. That story spread from mouth to mouth, reminding everyone that a sheltered heart is stronger than any stone wall. And Herminio began to see how people stopped running after false refugees. Promises from powerful men, empty alliances, hiding places that guaranteed protection, but not peace. Little by little, those who heard the message began to cleanse themselves, to confess what they hadn't confessed, to reconcile with those they had hurt, to return what they had unjustly taken. St. Michael also left instructions for guarding that refuge. "Where there is sincere prayer, I will dwell. Where there is humility, legions of angels will camp. Where there is purity, silent miracles will flourish. But where the door to pride, poisonous criticism, and a double life is opened, the refuge cracks. Guard it more than your house, more than your reputation, more than your body." Clara, sitting by the tree, understood that her mission was to help others build that inner sanctuary. She began visiting homes, praying with women who had never met to pray. Gabriel did the same with young people who were lost amid temptations and empty promises. And so, house by house, prayer by prayer, the refuge multiplied like a secret network of light in the midst of an increasingly turbulent world. But Herminio knew, and repeated it tirelessly, that a time would come when the final storm would strike with all its fury, and that those who hadn't cared for their inner refuge would feel fear, would run without knowing where, would seek protection where there was none. That's why he urged everyone to strengthen their inner sanctuary now, while there was still time to light the candle that no wind could extinguish. And as Clara lit another candle under the tree, while Gabriel held trembling hands in distant villages, Herminio closed his eyes and felt St. Michael whisper, "Prepare them for the final instruction. For the day will come when the spiritual refuge will need to open like an ark for others, and those who inhabit it must be a light and a shield for those who did not believe in time." When Herminio heard those final words from St. Michael, he understood that the spiritual refuge could not be a selfish den where a few locked themselves away to save themselves while others were lost outside. The Archangel was clear. Whoever builds a sanctuary within themselves is called to open it for those who did not know, did not believe, or could not. That message resonated in every whisper of the blossoming tree, in every lit candle, in every rosary recited at dawn. Herminio looked at Clara, Gabriel, and the others, and saw in their eyes the fear of knowing they had been chosen for something greater than themselves. Because opening the inner refuge, like an ark of mercy, meant taking risks, sharing the faith even with those who had scorned it, reaching out to those who mocked it, supporting those who stagger when nothing remains firm beneath their feet. St. Michael showed Herminio a powerful image, a flood not of water but of confusion, fear, violence, rumors of war and division. And in the midst of that flood, small arks floated, men, women, the elderly and young people, all with their sanctuary alight, united like islands of light. Each ark was not only a refuge for its inhabitants, but also a harbor for others. Those who seemed lost arrived battered, wounded, without the strength to pray for themselves. And it was there, within those beacon-like hearts, that they found solace. Clara understood that opening the ark would not be comfortable. It would require patience to endure criticism, strength to support those who still doubted, and courage to share the little they had when scarcity struck. She remembered Herminio's words, "It is not enough to save oneself. He who keeps the flame only for himself extinguishes it. He who shares it multiplies it." Gabriel, meanwhile, walked through distant villages telling stories of hope. He taught them how to light the inner candle, to pray without shame, to forgive old offenses. But he knew that many would arrive late, awakening only when the noise of the storm forced them to seek shelter. And there, steadfast hearts would have to become open arms, broken bread, a calming embrace. Herminio gathered everyone under the greening tree and explained how a silent ark is built. It's not about raising stone walls. It's about opening the door of the soul, letting go of prejudices, learning to listen without condemning. It's about preparing the heart to welcome the wounded, feed the hungry, shelter the persecuted. Because when the flood of confusion rages, rigid doctrines and cold sermons will not save. The warmth of living mercy will save, the charity that doesn't ask whom, the hand that reaches out even when it hurts. Claire began welcoming women into her small home who arrived trembling. Some were neighbors who had mocked the visible sign beforehand. Others were strangers who heard rumors of a blossoming tree and a speaking archangel. Gabriel did the same in humble homes converted into altars. He opened doors, offered water, shared prayer. And they soon understood that these homes were like silent grottos where the Virgin herself, Mother Mary, was present to embrace each one. St. Michael warned, "Many will come to the ark not because they believe in my voice, but because fear will drive them. Some will arrive confused, others resentful. Welcome them anyway. Don't look at what they were, look at what they can be. And remember, every wounded person who seeks refuge and heals becomes a beacon for others." Herminio insisted, "There will be no greatness in stone walls. Greatness will lie in the humility of hearts that say, 'Here you are safe, here we pray with you, here you are not alone.'" And as the storm loomed ever closer, rumors of war, hunger, divisions, broken families, the need to multiply those silent coffers became more urgent. One day, while Clara was preparing coffee for some visitors who had just arrived from a neighboring town, Herminio sat beside her and reminded her, "When you feel like you can't go on, when you think you've given everything, remember that it's not your strength that sustains you. It's the presence of Mother Mary and St. Michael at your side. They watch over every ark." Gabriel, in another village, repeated those words to confused young people. It doesn't matter how broken your life is. If you choose to open your heart as a refuge, grace will fill every crack. And when you least expect it, you yourself will be a haven for someone else. Thus, like small seeds planted quietly, the silent arks began to flourish where no one expected them. in humble homes, in divided families who reconciled, in young people who abandoned pride to learn to serve. And each ark was guarded by an invisible legion of angels, just as Saint Michael had promised. But Herminio knew there was still something else, that the time of warning was drawing to a close, that soon, when the storm struck mercilessly, a final bell would be heard, a final call, the voice of Mother Mary raising those still asleep, the final warning that will decide who enters the Ark of Mercy and who is left outside, trapped in the tempest. Night fell for the last time over the small village, as Herminio, Clara, Gabrielle, and all those who had lit their inner refuge gathered beneath the blossoming tree. The wind brought a strange silence, as if the sky were holding its breath. St. Michael's whisper had opened hearts, awakened consciences, raised living shelters, but the final word was missing. And that word was not brought by Herminio, not even by the mighty Archangel. The final voice was hers, Mother Mary, the lady clothed with the sun, the one who never abandons her children when the storm rages. Herminio, kneeling, felt his body tremble like a leaf. Clara held a rosary that slipped through her worn fingers. Gabriel looked at the sky, searching for a sign. And then, without noise or spectacle, the voice came like a touch of breeze, like a mother's caress, awakening a child who is dreaming too deeply. Little children, the time has come. My voice is the last warning before the great silence. Take refuge in my heart, because my heart is the ark that the Father has always prepared to protect those he loves. Not everyone listened with their ears. Some felt the voice as a thought impossible to ignore. Others saw it written in the eyes of those who prayed tirelessly. Clara, with tears streaming down her face, understood that the great warning was not a punishment, but a gift of love, a final bridge to cross from fear to hope. The mother spoke slowly, allowing each word to sink in deeply. Many will run to seek salvation in stone shelters, in proud leaders, in empty promises. But I tell you, no wall will protect if the heart remains closed. Open your homes, but first, open your souls. Give shelter to the pilgrim, but first to my son. Forgive one another before the night grows darker, because the coming storm will shake structures, governments, human alliances, but it will not be able to overthrow a heart sealed in my immaculate heart. Herminio remembered every word, as if his chest were burning with sacred fire. Mother, how do we seal our hearts in your heart? He asked, although the answer was already beating within him. Our Lady's voice was as gentle as a whisper and as firm as a sword. With purity, my child, with faithful prayer, with unconditional forgiveness, with the Eucharist lived as nourishment and shield, with the rosary that binds the enemy and leaves him powerless, with humility that crushes the head of pride. Clara felt small, and in that smallness she found the strength she'd never had. She understood that opening her home was only the beginning. She had to open her heart every day, every hour. Learn to love when it hurt. Learn to be silent when her pride wanted to scream. Learn to serve when exhaustion outweighed hope. Gabriel, looking at the young people gathered around him, understood that the great battle was no longer being fought outside, but within each individual. That true refuge was an invisible chain that united soul to soul, ark to ark, igniting a fire that no storm could extinguish. The Virgin continued, like a mother who tucks her child in before nightfall. Do not be afraid, my little children. Do not be afraid even if the earth trembles, even if the sun darkens, even if confusion tries to rob you of your faith. You are not alone. Saint Michael is with you. My angels surround every living ark. But strength lies in unity. If one falls, lift them up. If one grows cold, warm them. If one strays, seek them out. Do not abandon anyone, because every heart you rescue will be a jewel offered to the Father when the day of the final harvest arrives. Herminio, kneeling under the tree, felt his mission reaching its culmination. There was no great temple to build, no great army to recruit. There was an invisible army made up of humble souls, mothers on their knees, fathers teaching their children to say grace, elders praying while their hands trembled. Each one was a seed, and that seed would blossom even when night fell. Then Clara looked up and, through tears, understood. The final warning wasn't a fear that shackled, but an invitation to love more deeply, to open the door in time, to light the candle before the fire runs out, to sustain the faith of others when they waver. Because Mother had said, "Whoever remains steadfast to the end will shine like a star on my mantle." Gabriel took Herminio's hand. They both understood that the time had come to multiply what they had sown, that the visible sign had passed, that the invisible sword had awakened hearts, that the inner refuge had been built brick by brick with prayer and tears. Now, the final voice sealed the pact. Each steadfast heart became an ark, each ark a refuge for others, each refuge a spark of light for a world plunged into night. Saint Michael, from his invisible position, watched. The heavenly legions guarded every home where a rosary burned, and the Virgin, silent, wove a mantle of tenderness that would envelop every child willing to believe. Because not all would believe. Many would close their ears, mock the sign, extinguish the inner candle out of fear or pride. But even for them, Mother Mary wept and asked the faithful, "Do not tire of loving, do not tire of seeking, do not tire of opening the door. Because when all seems lost, the mercy of my Son will make all things new." Beneath the blossoming tree, the last root of hope in a land parched with faith, Herminio stood up. His legs trembled, but his voice was strong. "Today this warning ends, but the greatest mission begins, to be a living ark, a burning heart, a refuge open to all who come. What we receive freely, we must give without fear, because the Mother does not abandon, because Saint Michael does not sleep. Because he who loves to the end conquers the darkness." Clara lit another candle, a symbol of all the hearts that would burn even when their names were forgotten. Gabriel hugged a young man who was crying in fear, and in that embrace he understood that the greatest miracle was to provide shelter for the shipwrecked man. The last word wasn't a scream or a thunderclap, it was a maternal whisper. "Remain in my heart. Do not fear. Do not surrender. The darkness is great, but the light within is greater. And when dawn comes, we will meet face to face, and every tear will be a jewel, every wound a crown, every sacrifice a seed of eternity." And so, under the shade of a blossoming tree in the midst of a dry land, a handful of hearts sealed by Mother Mary became the living response to the final warning. A humble army, an open ark, a promise fulfilled, a prophecy made flesh, a whisper that transformed into a thunder of love will overcome the final storm.